Some ghost towns are silent because everyone has left. But Ruby, Arizona, was never truly silent. In the ruins of an old mining town near the Mexican border, visitors have reported hearing gunshots in the dark, wooden doors slamming where no doors remain, and the sound of a child crying somewhere inside the ruins. No one sees the child. No one knows where the crying comes from, and those who follow it often leave with more than a story. Tonight, we travel into the abandoned town of Ruby, where a podcaster searching for a forgotten murder uncovers a secret that was buried for nearly a century. A secret hidden beneath an old mercantile floor. A secret carried by a family that chose silence. And a final recording that should never have existed. This is the story of Ruby Ghost Town, the gunshots, and the crying child in the night. Some towns die because of war. Some towns die because of disease. And some towns die very slowly, one house at a time, one window at a time, one name on a headstone at a time. Ruby, Arizona belonged to that last kind. It did not disappear overnight. It was not burned to the ground. It was not swallowed by a sandstorm like the old stories of the Wild West often claim. Ruby was simply left behind after the gold, silver, lead, and zinc were no longer enough to keep people there. The miners left. Families packed up and moved away. The sound of or crushers faded. The school closed. The old store collapsed into time. And from then on, Ruby became a place where only the wind remained. But there was something strange about that wind. Those who had visited Ruby at dusk often said the wind did not merely pass through the crumbling adobe walls and empty window frames, carried sounds. Some people heard hoofbeats running over the dirt. Some heard wooden doors slamming, even though no doors were still intact. Some swore that when they stood near the old store, they heard gunshots behind them. And the most terrifying sound of all was the sound of a child crying. Not an ordinary cry. It sounded like a child trying to hold it in, as if the child knew that if they cried too loudly, something would find them. That October, Lynn Tran drove south from Tucson, Arizona, to record a special episode for her podcast, Forgotten Dust. Lynn was not a psychic. She had never called herself a ghost hunter. Her work was simpler than that. She traveled to abandoned places, recorded real environmental sounds, interviewed locals, and shaped the material into documentary-style stories with a mysterious edge. She loved forgotten places, old train stations, abandoned mines, towns that had once been alive, but now held only dust, barbed wire, and lizard tracks. Ruby was a place she had wanted to cover for a long time. Before the trip, Lynn had read everything she could find about it. She read about the mine that once operated day and night, about the families who lived in the dry desert heat, about the small school, the jail, the warehouse, the old cemetery, and especially the Ruby Mercantile, the store and post office that had once been the center of town, and the place where blood had been spilled. The more Lynn read, the more she realized Ruby was not just a ghost town. It was like an old locked box covered in dust, filled with sounds no one truly wanted to hear. She did not go alone. Traveling with her was Daniel Harper, an audio technician from Tucson. Daniel was tall, thin, quiet, and always wore sunglasses, even when the sun was already going down. He had worked in sound design for true crime documentaries, so to him, Ruby was simply a good location to capture wind, room tone, and a few unsettling effects. Do you actually believe in those ghost gunshot stories? Daniel asked as their pickup truck turned onto the dirt road leading toward Ruby. Lynn looked through the windshield. Ahead of them, the road stretched like a scar across the red earth. On both sides were mesquite bushes, cactus, and dry hills lying motionless beneath a pale blue sky. In the distance, the ruined roofs of Ruby began to appear, like the ribs of a dead animal. I don't need to believe, Lynn said. I just need to record something that keeps people from turning off the podcast halfway through. Daniel gave a quiet laugh. So what if we actually record a ghost? Lynn did not answer right away. She watched a crow perched on a leaning wooden post beside the road. It did not fly away as the truck passed. It only turned its head and followed them with its black eyes, catching the last of the sunlight like broken glass. Then that episode will do very well, she said. But for some reason, as she said it, her throat went dry. The caretaker that day was an old man named Miguel Ortega. He waited for them near the entrance gate, standing beside an old dust-covered Jeep. Miguel was about 70, with sun-darkened skin and hands as dry and rough as tree bark. He did not speak much. After checking their filming and recording permit, he handed them a simple map of the town site. Don't go into the mines, Miguel said. Don't wander too far after dark. And if you hear a child crying, don't answer. Daniel, who had been checking a microphone, looked up. What did you just say? Miguel looked at him with no expression. I said don't wander too far after dark. No, the part after that. The old man was silent for a few seconds. The wind passed through the open ground between them. A rusted sheet of metal hanging loose from the side of a warehouse trembled slightly, making a scraping sound like someone sharpening a knife. Miguel slowly said, Ruby has many old sounds. The wind makes people imagine things, but some sounds should not be followed. Lynn immediately turned on her handheld recorder. Have you heard the child crying? Miguel looked at the recorder in her hand. I have heard many things. Can you tell us about them? He shook his head. Not every story should be told before dark. Then Miguel pointed toward the old schoolhouse. If you want to record, start there. The wind sounds clearest inside the school. Then go to the jail, the warehouse, and if you still have time, the mercantile. But I'll say it again. Don't stay near the mercantile after dark. Daniel shrugged as the old man turned away. Perfect, he said under his breath. We've got the trailer before we've even started. Lynn did not laugh. She was watching Miguel walk away. There was something strange about the way he moved. He did not look down, yet he avoided every piece of broken wood, every stone, every shallow hole, as if he had walked through that place thousands of times. Or as if he was avoiding things other people could not see. Ruby's old schoolhouse sat silently in the late afternoon sun. The building was not large, but when Lynn stood before the entrance, she felt as if it was bigger inside her imagination. The walls were peeling. The windows were empty. Part of the roof had rotted away. Outside, traces of the old playground remained. A few bent metal bars, a swing frame with no seat, and a rusted slide tilted sideways like a blade stuck into the dirt. Daniel set up a directional microphone in the first classroom. Lynn stepped in after him, careful to avoid the broken glass. Inside, the air was cooler than outside. The smell of dust, old wood, and bat droppings mixed together. A few faded patches of blackboard still clung to the walls. Sunlight cut through the window openings at an angle, slicing the dust in the air into thin golden lines. Lynn took a few photos, Real children used to study here, she said softly. Daniel put on his headphones and adjusted the recording level. Yeah. And now we're recording wind in a dead classroom. Very sensitive. I do sound, not poetry. Lynn walked slowly past the broken desks. She placed her hand on the surface of one that remained near the window. The wood was dry, split with tiny cracks. In one corner were several faint carvings. Not clear words, just the uneven marks of children, small signs of existence left behind after nearly a century. As she bent down for a closer look, Daniel's headphones suddenly squealed. He yanked them off. Damn it! What was that? Interference, but weird. Daniel played back the short piece of audio he had just captured. At first, there was only wind. Then came a faint tapping sound, like chalk lightly striking a blackboard. Break time equals 0. Press / then a breath. Very soft. Lynn looked at Daniel. Did you breathe into the mic? I'm standing 6 feet away from it. They both fell silent. From the far end of the room, where darkness gathered beneath the doorway to the next classroom, came a tiny sound. Talk. Like a piece of chalk falling to the floor. Daniel cursed under his breath and picked up the camera. Probably a rat. Lynn said nothing. She walked toward the doorway. The next room was darker. Less sunlight reached it. In the middle of the room, a child's chair lay tipped over on its side. In the dust beside the chair was a long mark, as if someone had just dragged the chair leg across the floor. Lynn raised her camera. The moment she took the picture, a child laughed behind her. Not loudly, not clearly, just a tiny, quick heh. But it was enough to freeze her in place. Daniel heard it from the other room, too. He spun around. Lynn, did you play an audio file? No. They stood motionless, holding their breath. The wind slipped through the broken windows. At the back of the room, the blackboard made a long scraping sound, like fingernails being dragged across it. Daniel stepped inside and swept the room with his flashlight. No one was there, no fresh footprints except their own. But on the blackboard, in the thin layer of gray dust, a curved line had just appeared. Not a word. It looked like half of a circle, drawn clumsily by a child who had not yet learned how to draw a face. Lynn swallowed. We should go outside. This time, Daniel did not joke. They continued recording at the jail and the warehouse as the sun sank lower behind the hills. Nothing dramatic happened, but something inside Lynn had changed. At first, Ruby had only been a location. Now it felt like something that was listening to them. Every time she turned her back, she felt as if someone was standing behind a window. Every time Daniel stopped walking, the sound of footsteps seemed to continue for one extra beat behind them. Around 6:30, the light began turning a deep orange. The western sky glowed like coals. The abandoned buildings cast long shadows across the ground, stretching over the old road like black fingers. Miguel came back to find them. That's enough, he said. You should leave the mercantile area before dark. Lynn looked toward the remains of the old store. We haven't recorded there yet. Miguel frowned. I told you, come back tomorrow. We only need 15 minutes. No. His voice was calm, but there was something hard and final inside it. Daniel pulled Lynn aside. Let's go. We can record it tomorrow. But Lynn could not leave. Not because she was stubborn, but because ever since she had left the schoolhouse, something in her jacket pocket had been vibrating softly. First, she thought it was her phone, but when she checked, there was no signal and no notification. The thing vibrating was her backup recorder. She opened it. It was recording by itself. The screen showed a running time, 13 minutes and 7 seconds. Lynn was certain she had turned it off after leaving the schoolhouse. She plugged in her headphones. A strip of white noise ran through her ears. Then came wind. Then tiny footsteps. Then a child's voice whispered, so close it sounded as if it was right beside her ear. "Don't let Mother open the door." Lynn felt her spine turn cold. She pulled off the headphones and looked toward the mercantile. "I have to go there." Miguel stared at her for a long time. "You heard it, didn't you?" Lynn did not answer. The old man exhaled. "Then you should stay away even more. You know what it is." Miguel lowered his head, gripping the brim of his hat. "Ruby doesn't only keep the dead, keeps the moments of death. Some nights, this place repeats what it remembers. Horses, gunshots, crying. You hear it not because it is calling you. You hear it because you're holding something that can keep sound." Daniel cut in. "You're saying our recorders are making ghosts angry?" Miguel looked at him. "No, they only let them know someone is listening." The wind suddenly grew stronger. From the direction of the mercantile, distant but unmistakably clear, came a gunshot. Bang. Daniel flinched. Lynn froze. The sound was not like breaking wood. It was not like metal striking metal. It had an explosion, an echo against the hills, and a dead silence after it. Then another shot. Bang. In the empty space after the second shot, a child began to cry. Miguel closed his eyes. "It's too late," he said. None of them moved at first. Darkness was falling over Ruby fast. Desert nights were not like city nights. There were no streetlights to soften the fear. Once the sun disappeared, the world seemed drained of color. The houses became black shapes. The bushes became low, twisted figures. The mountains in the distance rose like a giant wall trapping the town inside. The crying was still coming from the mercantile. Not constantly. Every few seconds, there was another broken sob. Like a child hiding beneath a table, trying to cover their mouth but unable to stop being afraid. Lynn did not know why she started walking toward it. Maybe it was her profession. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was because the voice in the recorder had mentioned her mother. Not the child's mother. Lynn's mother. She had died 2 years earlier after a sudden stroke in California. Lynn had missed her final call because she had been recording inside an abandoned factory. In her mother's last voicemail, she had said only one sentence, "Please pick up." Ever since then, Lynn had been haunted by sounds she had failed to answer. "Lynn, stop," Daniel called. She kept walking. Miguel followed, but more slowly. As he walked, he murmured something in Spanish under his breath. When they reached the mercantile, Lynn noticed the ground around it was different. The red dust was thicker. Rotting pieces of wood were mixed with stone. Part of an adobe wall still remained, cracked and chewed away by time. The store that had once been the center of town was now only a low shadow beneath the black sky. The recorder in Lynn's hand lit up. It was recording again. No one had touched the button. Daniel raised his microphone out of professional instinct. He tried to stay calm, but his hand was shaking. I'm getting a really strong signal, he said. I'm hearing multiple layers. What kind of layers? Horses, shoes, people talking, very far away. Break time equals 0. Press / Lynn put on her headphones. Instantly, Ruby became another place. It was no longer a dead town. In her ears, it came alive. She heard the rough laughter of men. Coins dropping onto a counter. A door opening. A woman speaking softly. A child asking, "Mama, who are they?" Then everything went silent. A man shouted in a mix of English and Spanish. Lynn could not understand all of it, only a few scattered words. Tobacco, money, safe. Then came a gunshot. Very close. Lynn screamed and tore off the headphones. In front of her, in the empty space between two broken walls, a light appeared. Not a flashlight. Not moonlight. It was a weak yellow glow like an oil lamp. In that light, Lynn saw the figure of a woman kneeling on the floor. Her hair hung loose, and both of her hands clutched her throat. Behind her, a little girl stood in the doorway. The child wore a white dress stained with dust. Her face was hidden in shadow, but Lynn knew the girl was looking at her. Daniel saw her too. He stepped back and stumbled over a rock. "No way," Miguel said quietly. "Don't look too long, and don't speak to her." But the child had already raised her hand. She pointed at Lynn. Then she pointed down at the ground in front of the store. The crying stopped. In its place, from inside the ruins, came a faint scratching sound. Scratch. 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 Like a child's fingernails scraping against wood from underneath. Miguel began pulling Lynn backward. "Leave now. There's something under there," Lynn said. "That is not your business. You know, don't you?" Miguel did not answer. Daniel had already switched on his flashlight and aimed it where the child had pointed. The light fell on an old plank almost buried beneath sand. Under it was a narrow gap. From that gap rose cold air. Far too cold for the desert. Lynn knelt and brushed away the sand. Miguel grabbed her shoulder. "Break time equals 0. 45s / You don't understand." She turned to him. "Then explain it." The old man looked at her. In the beam of the flashlight, the wrinkles in his face seemed deeper, like cracks in dry earth. "My father worked in Ruby when he was young," Miguel said. "My grandfather did too. My family has lived around this land longer than the town itself. There are stories people tell but never write down. No one wants to write them down." "What stories?" Miguel looked at the plank. After the Pearson murders, people said only the girls survived. But some in town heard a child crying many nights afterward. At first, they thought it was memory, panic. Then someone said, "There had been another child in the store that day." Daniel frowned. "There's no record of that. Because that child was not supposed to be there." Lynn felt her heart grow heavy. "What do you mean?" Miguel closed his eyes for a second. "A little Mexican girl, the daughter of a woman who worked in the area. Her mother left her at the store that day while she went to pick something up from a family near the mine. When the gunshots started, the child hid. No one found her. She died under here? Maybe. Maybe." Miguel looked at Lynn with exhausted eyes. The mother's family searched, but after the murders, the town was terrified. People didn't want to dig. They didn't want to talk about a child with no official papers. They didn't want to make an already horrifying story even worse. Then Ruby kept living. The mine reopened. People rebuilt, covered, repaired, and the crying began. Lynn looked at the plank. "Do you know the child's name?" Miguel was silent for a long time. "Isabel." The moment he said the name, the entire mercantile shook with a violent thud. Not from under the ground. From inside the broken wall. Daniel's flashlight flickered. Lynn's recorder burst with sharp static, and then a child's voice came through the speaker. "Not Isabel." Miguel's face went pale. Daniel stepped back. Lynn stared at the recorder in her hand. The child's voice came again. "Not Isabel." Then a woman's voice, very faint and distorted, as if coming through water. "Don't let Mother open the door." Lynn stood up slowly. "That isn't from Ruby," she whispered. Daniel looked at her. "What?" Lynn could no longer hear him, because in that woman's voice, she had recognized her mother. All of their equipment lost signal at once. The flashlights went out. In complete darkness, Lynn heard Ruby wake up. It was not one sound. It was dozens of sounds layered together. Hoofbeats circling the building. Men shouting. Women crying. A child sobbing. A wooden door being pounded. Metal dragging across the ground. Gunshots exploding from every direction. Daniel screamed her name, but his voice was swallowed by the chaos. Lynn reached blindly through the dark. Her fingers touched a cold earthen wall. Then they touched a small hand. She froze. The hand was holding two of her fingers. Small, cold, covered in dust. A child's voice spoke beside her ear. "You didn't pick up either." Lynn could not breathe. Before her eyes, the darkness opened into another room. It was no longer Ruby. She saw her mother's kitchen in California. Afternoon light slipped through the curtains. On the table, a phone was vibrating. The screen showed her name, Lynn. Her mother stood by the sink. One hand gripped the edge of the counter. Her face was twisted by the stroke. She tried to reach the phone but could not. The phone buzzed a few more times, then went silent. Lynn had imagined this scene many times, but never this clearly. She heard her mother's labored breathing. She heard her fingernails scraping against the tabletop. She heard her trying to say, "Please pick up." Lynn began to cry. Break time equals 0. 45s/. "I'm sorry." The child's hand tightened around hers. "Don't be sorry. Open the door." The kitchen disappeared. Lynn was standing in front of the mercantile again. The flashlights came back on. Daniel was a few steps away, his face drained of color. Miguel was kneeling beside the plank, trembling as he made the sign of the cross. From under the plank, the scratching continued. Scratch. 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 Lynn understood something then. Ruby did not call people through fear, called them through guilt. Everyone who entered that place carried some sound they had failed to answer. A missed call, an apology never spoken, a cry ignored. And Ruby used that sound to pull them closer. "Help me open it," Lynn said. Miguel shook his head violently. No. If you open it, you don't know what might come out with it. There's a child under there. It is not a child anymore. You don't know that. Miguel looked at her, his eyes red. I do know, because my father opened it once. The air seemed to thicken. Daniel lowered the camera. Your father? Miguel nodded slowly. In 1976, when they were removing squatters from Ruby, my father came with the inspection group. He heard crying beneath the floor of the store. He dug it up. He found a small hollow. Inside were a cloth doll, a child's shoe, and a few pieces of bone. Lynn went cold. Then what? He buried them in the cemetery. Then why is the crying still here? Miguel looked at the plank. Because what's under there is not what my father found. At that moment, the plank cracked. A black gap appeared. From below rose a cold, rotten smell. Damp earth, decayed wood, and something like clothing left too long in a sealed closet. Daniel gagged. Lynn shone the flashlight down. It was not deep. Beneath the floor was a small hollow, just large enough for a child to crawl into. But there were no bones, no doll, no shoe. Only an old tape recorder. A small cassette recorder from decades ago. It lay in the dirt, untouched by rot, as if it had been placed there yesterday. On its casing was a strip of yellowed tape. No writing. Only a dark brown fingerprint. Miguel saw the recorder and his face changed. No! Lynn turned to him. You know this. Miguel stepped back, his lips trembling. That belonged to my father. Daniel wanted to leave immediately, but Lynn could not. She picked up the cassette recorder with a handkerchief. It was freezing cold and heavier than it looked. There was still a tape inside. The strangest thing was that when Lynn pressed play, it worked. No batteries. No power. The gears inside turned with a dry clicking sound. A man's elderly voice came out of the small, damaged speaker. My name is Rafael Ortega. If anyone hears this tape, it means Ruby still refuses to be silent. Miguel collapsed to his knees as if struck in the chest. Father! The tape continued. I told people I found the bones of a child. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. The wind around the mercantile stopped. Ruby became so silent that Lynn could hear her own heartbeat. I knew who that child was. Her name was not Isabel. Isabel was her mother's name. The child's name was Clara. Lynn looked at Miguel. The old man covered his mouth, his eyes wide. Rafael Ortega's recorded voice trembled. Clara did not die in the robbery. She survived. She hid under the floor. When people found the adults dead, when the girls were taken away, no one heard her. Or someone did hear her, and chose not to open the door. A warped sigh moved through the tape. Because the person who opened the door was my grandfather. Miguel shook his head, as if trying to deny the voice of the dead. No! My grandfather worked for the store. He saw the girl, but he also saw a bag of money near the hatch. He took the money, then he closed the plank. He thought he would come back later, but that night the whole town was being searched. Everyone was afraid the killers might return. He didn't dare say anything. By the time he came back, the child was dead. No one spoke. Lynn felt her throat close. Raphael's voice continued. From then on, Clara cried in Ruby, not because she wanted to hurt anyone. She cried because the last person who heard her chose silence. That guilt passed down through my blood. My father heard it. I heard it. And my son, Miguel, will hear it too. Miguel sobbed without making a sound. The tape crackled violently. Then Raphael's voice dropped lower. I buried what was left of Clara, but I could not bury the sound, because the sound is not in the bones. It is in the last action of the living. If Ruby is ever to be silent, someone must open the door before the crying stops. The tape ended. Click. Immediately, from the hollow below, a child began to cry. This time, the sound was not far away. It was right beneath their feet. Open the door. The little girl sobbed. Please. Lynn looked at the open plank. She understood the horrifying truth of Ruby. The town was not haunted by those killed in the robbery. The gunshots were not the most terrifying thing. What held Ruby in place was a cry someone had once heard and chosen to ignore, and that guilt did not belong to the dead. It belonged to the living. Miguel crawled toward the mouth of the hollow, trembling. Clara, he whispered, I'm sorry. Below them, silence. Then the child's voice came. You are not the one who closed the door. Miguel cried. But I am the one who kept silent. Lynn looked at him. You knew all this before? Miguel nodded, nearly collapsing. My father told me before he died. He made me promise never to dig it up again. He said if Ruby was left alone, the crying would fade. But it didn't. No. Because you all kept staying silent. Miguel did not argue. Daniel set the camera down. For the first time since they had arrived in Ruby, he was not thinking about footage, sound, or the podcast. He was only looking at the hollow beneath the floor as if he were staring at a wound that had been bandaged incorrectly for 100 years. Lynn took a deep breath. We're going to bring the story into the light. Miguel looked up. No one will believe it. Not everyone has to believe it. They only have to stop pretending they don't hear it. She turned on her recorder and placed it beside the opening. Clara, Lynn said, her voice shaking but clear, if you want to say something, I'm listening. For several seconds, there was no sound. Then a small breath rose from the darkness below. Then the girl's voice spoke. No longer distorted. No longer distant. Did my mother come back? Lynn closed her eyes. The question went through her like a bullet. She could not lie to a child who had waited nearly a century. Miguel lowered his head to the ground. Yes, he whispered. Your mother came back. She searched for you. She called your name until her voice broke. She did not abandon you. The crying stopped abruptly. My mother called me? Yes. Did she hear me? Miguel began to cry harder. She heard you, but too late. A long silence followed. Then Clara said, Then open the door. Lynn, Daniel, and Miguel pulled the plank aside together. Beneath it, there was no longer a dark hollow. In the flashlight beam, they saw a small empty space glittering with dust. At its center lay a mother-of-pearl button, no larger than a fingertip. No one knew how long it had been there. No one knew why Miguel's father had never found it. Miguel reached down and picked up the button. The moment his fingers touched it, all of Ruby released a sigh. Not from one person, from the entire town. Wind passed through the empty window frames. The rusted sheet of metal fell silent. Far away, at the old schoolhouse, the swing frame without a seat trembled once, then stopped. There were no more gunshots. No more crying. Only desert. Break time equals 0. 55s / and a sky filled with stars. They left Ruby close to midnight. Miguel said nothing else. He held the button in his palm as if he feared that if he let it go, everything would begin again. Daniel drove. Lynn sat in the passenger seat with the recorder on her lap. No one turned on the radio. No one wanted to fill the silence with false sound. As the truck left the dirt road, Lynn looked back. Ruby lay behind them, dark and still. For the first time, it seemed like a town that had truly died. Not waiting for someone. Not calling to someone. Just dead. Daniel quietly asked, "Are you going to use the recording?" Lynn looked down at the device. "I don't know yet. This would be your biggest episode. Maybe. But..." Lynn did not answer. She thought of her mother, the missed call, the words "please pick up," that had haunted her for 2 years. Then she thought of Clara, a child who had cried for nearly a century not to frighten people, but to ask one very simple question. Can anyone hear me? When she returned to Tucson, Lynn stayed up all night backing up the data. There were more than 7 hours of audio. But strangely, every file recorded in Ruby was empty. No gunshots. No crying. No voice of Rafael Ortega. No Clara. Only wind. Daniel checked the camera memory card. The entire mercantile sequence was black with static. Lynn's photos did not capture the little girl in the schoolhouse. The blackboard appeared normal, coated in dust, with no mark drawn across it. The only evidence left was the mother-of-pearl button. Miguel kept it. 3 days later, he called Lynn. His voice sounded much lighter than it had before. "I buried it," he said, "outside the cemetery fence, near where the people without headstones are buried. Do you still hear anything?" Miguel was silent for a few seconds. "No. Last night, Ruby was quiet." Lynn exhaled. She thought the story ended there. But that evening, while editing a rough draft of the podcast, Lynn found a strange audio file on her computer. Break time equals 0. 35s / It had no name. No creation date. Its file size was very small. She did not remember copying it over. Lynn stared at the screen for a long time before pressing play. At first, there was static. Then a soft breath. Then her mother's voice. Not distorted. Not distant. Clear, as if she were standing right behind her. "Lynn." She froze. Her hands rested on the keyboard, unable to move. Her mother's voice continued. "This time, I heard you." Tears filled Lynn's eyes. But before she could say anything, another sound came through the file. A tiny child's laugh. Then Clara whispered, "Thank you for opening the door." The file ended. Lynn sat in the dark for a very long time. Outside her apartment window, the Tucson night wind moved through the dry palm trees. The city was still lit. Cars still moved along the streets. Everything was normal. But from that day on, Lynn never made the podcast episode about Ruby. She deleted the entire draft. She returned the sponsorship money. She wrote only one line on her website. Some sounds were never meant to be played for others. 1 month later, Daniel sent her a message. There was only one audio file attached. And one sentence. "You need to hear this." Lynn opened the file. It was the sound of desert wind. Then footsteps. Then the creak of an old wooden door. After that came Daniel's voice, breathless. I didn't go back to Ruby. I swear I didn't go back there. The audio went silent for a few seconds. Then, from very far away, came a gunshot. Bang. A pause. Bang. And finally, the sound of a child crying. But this time, it was not Clara's voice. Lynn turned ice cold when she heard the child whisper through the file. There is one more door. Some places do not haunt us because they want revenge. They haunt us because something was left unanswered. A voice ignored. A door never opened. A child waiting in the dark for someone, anyone, to finally listen. And maybe that is what makes Ruby so terrifying. Not the gunshots. Not the ruins. Not even the crying in the night. But the thought that some sounds do not disappear. They wait. If this story kept you listening until the end, make sure to subscribe to Infinite Story Realm. Here, we uncover forgotten places, disturbing legends, true locations, and supernatural stories that still echo long after the final word. Leave a comment below and tell us, if you heard a child crying in an abandoned town, would you follow the sound? Or would you walk away before the door opened? Thank you for listening. And remember, some sounds were never meant to be played for others.